Internet. This is Dyslexic Talk with Rick and Ellie. This is our first episode, and we're going to talk about what are we going to talk about, Ellie?
Dyslexia, I guess. Our
Dyslexics
experience.
talking amongst themselves.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
was thinking, Ellie, for this first episode, our inaugural episode, that we would just talk about why we want to do this. Why do we want to talk to
Mhm.
each other? Why do we want to talk about dyslexia amongst dyslexics?
Yep. That makes sense. I think it's important.
Uh, it's really important.
Mhm.
And we talked about this before, but one of the things that I find that I think is going to be really important is that even if just one person gets something from this, whether it's a parent or a teacher or a fellow dyslexic, like we will win. Even if we did like 6,000 hours of this, to me, that would be a win.
Yeah. I think that would be a huge one. I think there are a lot of people who grow up thinking that dyslexia is solely just an impediment to them, and if one person can realize that there are benefits to being a dyslexic as well as there are
Mm-hmm.
some struggles, but those are mostly because of the world we live in and not because of ourselves inherently. Like,
Yeah.
that would be a huge game
Yeah.
changer. Yeah.
A big game changer. So that's a
Mm-hmm.
good point. One of the things that most people don't know is that dyslexics just wire their brains differently than quote normal people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe in a future episode we can show some of the brain scans. But the brain scans are fascinating when they superimpose like a dyslexic's brain on top of a normal brain. A dyslexic's brain is wired in more places, and so it's just that
Yeah.
a dyslexic is using they're actually using more of their brain to do things, and so that
Mm-hmm.
makes them think differently and do things differently. So it's not an impediment; it's
No, it's
actually
just
a benefit.
different brain type. Exactly. It's like,
Exactly.
I mean, those brain scans show how much more there's different, more and different connectivity between different parts of a brain in a dyslexic person versus just a more neurotypical person, which is just
Exactly.
insane. I think I've seen how that plays out in my life for sure.
Do you have an example? Do you have an example?
Oh, just like I think there's a lot of times where I feel like I see an obvious answer to a problem, or I have this idea that seems obvious to me. I don't know. Like, for example, in art, like I often come up with like very strange topics just off the top of my head. I don't know, just like a combination between inanimate objects and like animals, and it just flows off the top of my head. But when people see that, I mean, like, my friends are often like, "Were you tripping when you made this? Like, what? Like, were you on drugs? You know?" And it's just like, no, my brain is just very strange
What
and
you're
a
saying
little
is
different.
when you're presented with a problem or some
Mm-hmm.
task, whether it be creative or otherwise, you come up with a solution that other people go, "What?"
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
No,
yeah, and
I've I've had that
it
happen
appears
so
strange,
many
but
times.
it's not. It's
Yeah.
just like
Do you remember the
strange for the
first time
flow.
that happened? I
The
have
fir-
a very distinct memory of that. Do you have a very distinct? Do you remember the first time that you noticed that?
huh? What's? I mean, I think one of the things that first I first noticed that was very not neurotypical was when I was younger. I was ambidextrous, um, and
Mm-hmm.
that apparently had something to do with being dyslexic. And so I used to write. I would My right hand would get really tired, so when I was writing, I would switch right from my right hand to my left hand, like
Yeah.
mid sentence. Um, and I thought that was such an obvious solution to things, but everybody else was like, that is not normal. That is not what you're supposed to do. And in fact, my tutor, when I was 7 years old, forced me to choose a hand and just stick with it.
Right.
So she, I just arbitrarily
You had to
chose
choose
what
a hand.
hand I was when I was seven.
What what can you do? What? How did you
And I
decide?
remember I remember thinking, I was like, most people are right-handed, and I just want to be normal, so I'm just gonna be right-handed. But to
That's
this day,
awesome.
there are things that I only do with my left hand, so I don't know if
What do
I
you do
chose
with
the
your
right
left
Left hand.
hand.
hand?
Yeah,
That's funny.
yeah.
My first memory of what you just so eloquently described, as when poised with a problem or tasked with figuring
Hmm.
something out, and then doing it, and people saying something to me like, "That's weird. That's not what I asked you to do."
Hmm.
Um, was I was at like a Boy Scout camp thing, and I didn't want to be there, and we were camping in some podunk place in Oregon next to a small river slough thing. And I
Hmm.
remember getting in trouble because me and a bunch of other guys were, I must have been like 7 or 8. And
Hmm.
me and a bunch of other guys were playing around down by the water. And one of the leaders got mad at us. And the leader said, you need to write, you need to write 20 words of why you won't do that again. Whatever we did. I don't remember what we did. But this is the weird part. So I just assumed that you're supposed to string the 20 words together into sentences. And
Yeah,
I handed it in, and the guy's like, "I just asked you to write words, not sentences." But my mind was like, "Oh, well, why would you do that? That's stupid." Like, and so
yeah.
that's what and I've had that happen to me over and over and over again. When given a task to do something, I
Hmm.
do it, and I either, sometimes people love it, but most of the time they don't.
Most of the time, it looks like you either try too hard or you're cutting corners, and there's no in between. I feel like what is or something just
Maybe a
appears weirdly
troublemaker.
supernaturally easy. Like I know that since I was little, I've had um I've been super observant ever since I was little, and I'm really good at remembering um like markers on a route or something like that. So since I was like 7, I've been able to direct people on these like long drives. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, I remember baffling. I guess bafflement is like the right word for like how other people react to like what we do. But
Yeah,
I remember my
it
grandma
is
just being
bafflement.
baffled at all these different routes I could take on to get her to places that my mom had said like, "Oh, I need to like you to pick me up from grad school at 3." And so my grandma would take
Hmm.
me with her to pick her up, and then I would be the one directing her. And she'd be like, "How do you know how to get here? You're like 5 years
That's
old."
awesome.
But
That's awesome.
yeah,
And I
it
think
was just
that's like we're hitting on the things of why the things that I believe now as a 51-year-old that should be encouraged rather than set apart as different, or
mhm.
that it needs to be done in a standard, things need to be done in a standard way.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I
Yeah.
think that what I've discovered is the things that we've just described, the behaviors of the way that we do things based on
Mhm.
things that are put in front of us and how we move through space, like you just described, like we move through space and we see things and notice things that other people
Mhm.
don't, should be, I believe it should be nurtured rather than stopped. Now,
For
we
sure.
both know that they can't stop it. We're going to do it no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But I
that's
think
another one of my driving factors for doing this, for us talking, is
yeah. Well, I feel like
It's a
so
good
much of
podcast.
what happens is that those aspects aren't actively nurtured, but they're also not actively like repressed by anybody. But what happens is dyslexics, and like I guess all not non like neuroatypical people are forced to work so hard to conform
Hmm.
to how
Hmm.
society
Hmm.
works and like how schools work. When they're
Hmm.
young, they have to just pour so much energy into learning how to read the right way, learning how to write the right way, learning how to interact, plan,
Yeah.
do everything the way that neurotypical people tell us we should be doing it. And so you just have
Yeah.
to divert so much energy into not nurturing those talents that they fade by the time you become an adult. You just have to like leave them behind so you can fit into the world that we have
Or
right
you just
now.
stressed out all the time because you're not doing
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
In my
Mhm.
case, I'm a little, I'm older than you, so it was in my generation, you weren't given much assistance.
Mhm.
Um, like you were able to get tutoring. I didn't get tutoring. I was just left to my own devices. And how that manifests itself in the typical situation, like in school, let's say, is that teachers would just be like, "Oh, he'll figure it out."
Mhm.
But that but for me that was misleading because I'm never going to figure out how to write an email correctly without missing words, without problems. Like, right? Like I know we've joked about this before, but like if you asked me to write an email that was like correct for whoever says things are correct or die, I would die every time. Like I would never be able
Yep.
to write an email or a way that
Yep.
somebody's standards ever.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think what that's for me is one of the biggest examples of the
The typical.
right, the neurotypical way of moving through space. I
Mhm.
felt oppressed over time. I didn't know I felt oppressed, but I felt oppressed having to perform to this standard that I'm never going to be able to perform to. But now that I'm
Mhm.
51 and relatively successful, I never needed to be. I never needed to perform to their standard.
Mhm. Yep.
And
It takes a long time. But like you said, it's not that somebody sets out to do this on purpose. But
Mhm.
but you're like you struggle because there's nobody there, and that's why we're making this. There's no one there to say, no, you're doing fine. Don't worry about it. You're never going to be able to write the email correctly. But like to your point, you could spend your whole life trying to figure out how to do it, and you're never going to get there because, looping back to the beginning, our brains are wired differently, and so you're never going
Mhm.
to be able to do it. And I like to jokingly say, you don't get to decide how you wire your brain,
No.
right?
No. At
So
all.
it's amazing to me. But so then
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits in this first episode too. What you
Mhm.
and I think of as benefits, and I call them superpowers now because I think it's a superpower. Um, what would you say now that you're done with college, university,
Mhm.
and you're on your own? What would you say looking back has been one of the like one or the maybe the top two benefits of being dyslexic versus being quote unquote normal?
Yeah. I think Well, I think there's two sides of this. There's the side of the skills I have developed, the skills that I have inherently because I'm dyslexic, and the skills I
mm-hmm,
have developed in order to compensate for my dyslexia in,
mm-hmm,
the world that we live in right now. So, like, in terms of skills that I have for, like, that I think I have inherently, is I think I have a lot of visual skills. Like, I like understand space very well, and that like
mm-hmm,
manifests in art. And it also manifests as like I am always oriented. Um, and I think I'm really good. I think this also like sort of bleeds over into like social interactions and so like that. I am able to read people really well and
mm-hmm.
understand where how people fit into a social group really well and what their roles are relatively quickly, which I think has
Yeah,
also benefited me when I'm trying to compensate for my day. Like I know who to go ask for help. I know who, pulls the
yeah.
strings in a group setting and who um like will be like my biggest advocate. Um
You
but
can pick
then
out
I
your.
think I
Friends or foe,
also
friend or foe.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And then I also think I have like a lot of good big picture skills, which always a common thing that is said that dyslexics are able to do. Like they're really good at big picture thinking. But I
yeah,
think that's true, like especially when I'm like planning these. Well, back in college when I was planning these big projects, especially like group projects, I was really good at like you know keeping hold of like the big overarching ideas and not getting too dragged into the minutia of
mm-hmm,
like what was going on. And I think that definitely transfers into my work now, where it's like I am just like, a hard physical labor, but I am working on a crew. And so, you know, I understand everybody's roles and I understand how to fill in the gaps of those roles, but I also understand like what are like the I don't know, at any given job, what are the three main priorities of like what needs to get done in order for this job to get done as quickly as possible, and then I then focus on where do I fit into getting those goals done, I guess. So I have like a very I easily grasp what needs to get done and like what is the overarching goal of anything that I'm setting myself to.
And you see it, do you see, my guess is you see it pretty quickly when you roll into a new situation.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Have you watched yourself? Is there anything that you do when you come into a new situation? Have you ever watched yourself paying attention, figuring out what you just described?
Yeah, I think I often catch myself figuring out, especially, I mean, I think I'm a pretty social person. So I think I often catch myself figuring out people's roles in a group, and figuring out where I fit into that group. But I think like I very quickly see like the entire group dynamic and like sort of understand who has the power, who's trying to suck up to the power, who's like who are companions at like or friends at a deeper level, you know, who I don't know. It's just like I can very easily read the whole picture of a group and just get a vibe for what is going on within them. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I
My
definitely
brother
catch
had a
myself.
my brother had a great term for what you just described. He called it fake executive skills. because there's skills that most people don't have. You roll into a room or you roll into a social situation, whether it be like just hanging out with friends, meeting new people, or a work situation, or maybe even a new city or something, right? Where you're meeting people in a new city. It serves you really well to be able to see the big picture and to spot the dynamics of the group. Because but it's not just spotting it, it's being able to be, like you just described, being a participant in that, knowing what to do in relationship to all that. And what's interesting is that most people, I don't know if you've noticed this, most people can't do that or don't know how to do that.
Yeah. It is interesting. I witness people not understanding their role and either thinking that they are smaller or less important in the group, or they are too important in the group. And like both of those things, they either breed resentment or pity, and I see that happening all the time. And I'm just like, how do you not see what's going on here? Like, how do you not understand your role? You know, like you could be doing more, or you should be really doing less. You know, like you need to step back. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's one of the things that I think should be a future episode is a topic with other dyslexics is how they use that ability. Because one of the things you hear about with like famous dyslexics, like Charles Schwab, let's say, is he gets along with people, he understands people, and when he was in college, he even persuaded his friends to take notes for him because he knew he couldn't take notes very well. So I think being able to understand people is a really powerful thing.
It's definitely a
Dyslexics
coping
have in
strategy too.
disproportion. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it'd be interesting to know the brain science on that, the coping versus the actual brain structure.
Sort of a chicken or the egg
Structure.
question, you know, because
Yeah.
this,
Well,
I totally utilize this to benefit me in situations where I'm not naturally going to be able to do well, you know, especially in school settings. You know, I really, really was good at sucking up to professors and getting professors to like me and give me breaks and take way too much time to help me out when they did not have to do that. And that was definitely, and like it was coping strategy. It's how I did college. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know which came first, dyslexia or good social
but
skills.
here's the thing: it may be a nurture thing, but we all have it. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The flavor might be different. Yeah, I've definitely
Mm-hmm.
doubled down on the social aspect, especially as I've gotten older, because um, I've abandoned, I don't know if I told you this, but I'm pretty much been abandoning my cell phone and email and my computer because I realized because of my social skills, the fake executive skills that my brother called them, I realized that they work better than email. They work
Yeah.
better than the computer. They work better than my
Mm-hmm.
phone. I get more done
Yep.
and I have more fun. So, and I work in an academic situation where you'd think that that wouldn't be possible, but it's totally possible.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
I just talk to people and I go ask them questions and I have good relationships and I'm good at understanding what to ask and what not to ask. I'm good at taking risks. I'm also really good at taking risks socially that other people would not
Mm-hmm.
ever be willing to do. And I'll give you an example. Because I can read a room and now I can even read an institution, what's going on at the institution, I can kind of see something that's missing and go to a certain person and be like, hey, I want to help you out. I see this thing. Is this true? And they'll be like, man, I wish somebody would ask me that 10 years ago. I'm so glad you're in my office. And that would have never happened if I would have stuck to the structure of emailing and sticking
Mm-hmm.
to the hierarchy of academia. So I've been doubling down on using the social skills in a really significant way, and I'm reaping the dividends of it. It's amazing. Um,
Yeah. I see myself
yeah.
like I feel like this is the first setting where, it's not just a restaurant. It's not just like an hourly job. This could be a career. So I feel like more invested in it. But
Yeah.
like I see myself bridging those gaps between people, where, like I can understand that like person A and person B do not communicate well, right? And so I can bridge in between them, and everything runs smoother, right? Or I'm I realize that like one person always misunderstands another person and thinks that the other person is like prepping, or thinks that the other person is begging or like being too like feeble minded or something like that. And I can,
Mm-hmm.
be like, no, 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 like calm down. They're not coming for you. This is just how they just cannot see what is going on, right? And
Yeah.
it's definitely like helping me just like I feel like everybody in my crew is starting to
Mm-hmm.
appreciate me, maybe at like a little bit faster rate than like some of the other
Mm-hmm.
new people. And I think that's partially it, because I can like bridge those gaps and make everything work more cohesively, because I can see what is going on in the social dynamic of the group.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's
I'm
fascinating.
hoping that
It's
we'll start seeing
fascinating. I
closings.
can't
But
wait to talk to more people. I can't wait to
yeah.
interview and talk to more people. I think it'd be really fun
Mm-hmm.
to start triangulating some of these superpowers or experiences of our fellow dyslexics, right? Because if you think about it, dyslexics don't have a voice.
Like I say,
No,
yeah.
not
Granted,
at
okay,
all.
the culture likes to point out people like, I don't know, like Leonardo da Vinci, or they look back and they cherry pick who they want to pick, and then just say, oh, they were dyslexic. How nice is that? But dyslexics aren't advocating for themselves or don't have a voice
No.
for themselves. So I think this is another like amazing reason to do this is to create a voice for each other
Yeah.
that would benefit somebody who doesn't hasn't maybe come to the same place you and I have, because you and I have a similar temperament about it,
Mm-hmm.
even though we're 30 years apart, right? In age.
Yeah.
But
No, I totally agree.
Don't you
I
think
also
so,
feel like
Brady?
so I
dyslexia
was
has been
thinking,
memeified, which would be an
What was
interesting
that?
topic. I don't know, just like
Magnifier?
how the negative parts are portrayed in like social media and just like
Yeah.
everyday conversation, and nobody ever talks about the benefits, which is understandable because the downfalls are pretty funny, but like it is an
yeah,
interesting little avenue,
Well,
Yeah.
one of the last things I want to ask you before we maybe like talk about what we want to do next with this conversation is I fantasize a lot about what it would be like to live in a culture that doesn't have writing.
Because I think that,
Um, Dyslexics. What if? Okay, one of my favorite cultures that didn't have writing was the Neolithic people, the people who built Stonehenge. Like nobody knows
Mm-hmm.
what Stonehenge is because they didn't write it down. They didn't have a written language. So I fantasize about dyslexics must have like kicked butt and taken names in a culture that didn't have writing because there
Mm-hmm.
was nobody to say you were doing it wrong ever in any situation. There was just it. There was just
Mm-hmm.
it worked or it didn't work.
Exactly. And
So
also, all that stuff took so much teamwork, like so much social
yes,
cohesion to move those massive stones.
exactly.
Yeah.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
okay, maybe this is another one last thing I want to talk about is I've noticed that I prefer to collaborate. I prefer to work with other people and collaborate with other people. I really enjoy that process. So I think you're right. Like to build Stonehenge, you have to collaborate and cooperate in a really profound way. I like doing things
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
myself, but I really get a lot of enjoyment out of being a valued team member. Now I know lots of people do, but I especially thrive in that environment.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like do I get a lot of fulfillment because I know I'm doing well when I'm in a group setting. Um, yeah, I really thrive when I get to collaborate with other people. I would totally agree. Yeah, I would be
Okay, and
really
I'll keep
interested
saying
in
one last thing.
other. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say one
Oh,
last
what
Last
were you
thing.
gonna
thing,
say?
and oh
Mm-hmm.
well. So one of the other reasons that I wanted to do this, record these conversations for other people, was I've had one of the weird things in my life because I'm 30 years ahead of you, Ellie, is that all my friends at my university, my friends that are also faculty members, guess what they're saying to me? They're like, "You're really smart and you think differently. Like I want you to be a part of my thing." And that
Mm-hmm.
never happened when I was in high school or college, right? So it's
No.
really
No.
interesting that the traditional, but what's interesting is to have the traditional person finally notice, like, wait, that guy's up to something. We should listen to him. But but it's taken 50 years. It's taken 50 years for other people to go, wait a minute. You know what it is? They've noticed that they're spinning in a circle, going around and around and around, and I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
constantly trying to forward the ball in a different way than they are. And they're just in a like a narrow, spirally circle. And they don't like that anymore. But you know what?
Yeah.
They were rewarded for that. They were rewarded for that for 50 years to their own peril, at their own peril. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not actually the path that you want to go down as a human being, to be rewarded
No.
for a narrow way of doing things. So that's another reason why I really want to do this is that eventually people catch on. But I think that if we can have it, if this conversation can get broad enough, maybe more people will catch on sooner so that that 6 year old who's dyslexic in first grade is getting um, what I'm getting right now at 50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No.
That, right?
I mean, yeah. I feel like I was shit on my entire like through college.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, no, I feel like it's gonna take me a long time. It's gonna take me until I hit some sort of leadership role for people to be like, "Wow, you're really useful. I like the way you think," right? And people do that in small
yeah,
bits now, but a lot of times it's like, "How do you not understand this yet?" Or like, "How do you not remember this?"
yeah,
Or
yeah.
um especially in college, like how are you messing up grammar still? You're a 21-year-old who is in like upper level classes, right? Like you're
Yeah,
just
right.
constantly getting shit.
Well,
So
Okay,
yeah,
that's
I would
what
love for
you just said,
I think that's a segue into our next episode. the horror
Yeah.
show of being a dyslexic in school and having to write and do emails. That's
Yes.
our next
Emails are,
episode. Yes,
yes,
we
I
need to
would
talk
agree.
about that
I would
because
agree. It's such a shit show. It's so
it's
bad.
a nightmare. And you know what's funny
Yeah.
is this is why it has to be our next episode, and then we can stop and see what Steve thinks of what we just said.
Hmm.
I told Steve we need to reference him if he's gonna be our producer. We need to like talk about Steve, like because he's not on the,
Yeah,
the thing. But I told you the
for
story where I
sure.
had a student who, like I know that whatever I send to students or in my emails wrong, and I know it's a nightmare,
Hmm.
but everybody's gotten used to it. But when I get a new class
Hmm.
of students, they don't know, right? So I emailed all the students like, "Hey, here's what I want you to do for Wednesday." Like, and it's really simple, right? Like read something and do something, and then we get to class, the next class period, and this kid raises his hand. He's like, "Hey, it's kind of concerning to me that a college professor like can't send a grammatically correct email." And I was like, I just looked at the guy and I was like, "Hey, sorry about that, dude. Like, what'd you think about the reading?" You know what I mean? Like I was like, I
Yeah.
just kind of like bypass it. And I
Hmm.
had another kid say that to me. He's like, "Well, I think it's kind of upsetting that a university professor can't, spell correctly or do grammar correctly." And I was like, "Well, this kid," I said, "Well, everybody knows that I can't, so what's no big deal."
Well, it's like you still were able to know that you had to do the reading, right? Like you communicated what had to
Yes.
be done.
Exactly. So that's our next episode is reading and
Yeah,
emails
for
and
sure.
papers growing up as a form of torture.
Yes. Well, and it's just pure frustration because you feel like these rules are so arbitrary. Like everybody knows what you're saying. It's just not the prettiest, according to them.
Exactly.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
then we could talk about the
Yeah.
benefits. I think we should talk a little bit about that struggle, like you hinted at that too, like that the struggle of having
Hmm.
to conform to the way things are done, and we're never going to be able to do it.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's definitely been some benefits in that too, even though it was very, right, it's very difficult for many, many
Yeah.
years, because there's nobody there to
Hmm.
help you understand what's going on. But so I was
No.
thinking that, yeah, some of our next episodes should be reading and writing. Some of them
Yeah.
should be interviews with other dyslexics. If
Hmm.
you know anybody, I have my colleague at Sardal, this art history project I'm working on in San Francisco, Tanya. She's
Hmm.
dyslexic. I could ask her. I think we should shoot big and get people like Charles Schwab and who's the guy that played the Fonz? What's his name? I always forget his name. He's dyslexic. Um, there's some famous dyslexics. We should try to get them on
Yeah,
our
for sure. That would be
On our
great.
phone.
I would love to hear. I think it's also, I think the perspective of older dyslexics who are in leadership roles and
Yes.
looking back and seeing how it's benefited them
Yes.
um,
Yes.
is really interesting, especially for like people my age who are still in the thick of it and are still trying to like
That's a
prove
great idea.
yeah.
themselves. Yeah, I think that could be really
Well,
valuable.
this is just a side note.
Now, what would it take? What would it take for you to be persuaded that you already have it? You don't need to do anything else.
What do you mean?
Well, I
I
Like
know
mean,
that
you
I
feel
have
you're
what it
probably still
takes?
shaking. Yeah, you're still shaking off the academic baggage.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm saying is you have everything you need to do everything you need to do. You could just if you could shake the academic baggage faster than I did. Don't let it take you 30 years. Just
Yeah,
do it. Like
I
just
think it's just
I would say double down on being dyslexic. Double down on it. Triple down on it. Like quadruple down on it. Just say screw the rest of these people and do it your way
yeah.
because it'll work every time, Ellie. It'll work. It'll work.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of not second guessing myself and trusting my
yeah,
gut when I feel like I
yeah,
could be useful and then just being like,
yeah,
okay, yes, you will be useful if you do what you think you should do. Right? Because there's so many times in like
yeah,
school where I was like, I think this would be useful and your professor was like, that was fucking irrelevant. And you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like there's
yeah.
yeah.
Don't
Use
use.
Yeah.
the academic rubric for your life. It's not useful
Mhm.
outside of
No, not
that
at all.
system.
Not
Yeah.
at all.
Well, awesome, Ellie.
Yeah.
This is great. I'm excited. I'm super stoked
Yeah.
that Steve
It's
is
great.
producing this for us.
Yeah. Thank you to
Um,
Steve.
Well, let's get together again soon and do this, and we'll talk
For
about
sure.
emails, and then let's get some lists of names so we can reach out to them.
Yes, for sure.
all right.
Sounds
All
good.
right.
Everybody, we'll see you at Dyslexic Talk next time, whenever that is.
Yeah.